Challenge runs. Release me from this mortal coil. As you may or may not already know, I've done a few of these now. I mean, I call them challenge runs, but really it's just every enemy is X, where I try to break the game until it becomes a challenge to play it without losing your mind. My fondest memories of games are where I'm presented with a roadblock that forces me to formulate an array of tactics to pull myself out of the problem. But the solution is unique and never used again. Think of Halo, Arkham, or Dishonored on the highest difficulties, where you employ a process completely unique to yourself to overcome it. Ceaseless ceased my brain functions, Gaping gaped me, and the Hydra performed a world-class lobotomy. They each broke the game in their own way, and while I did receive an inordinate amount of neurodegeneration, it just wasn't enough to prevent me from continuing onto the other games. I tried to get Dark Souls 2 to work, but the game is so poorly made that the modders have thus far been unable to create an enemy randomizer that doesn't detonate your PC. So I move on to the next game. As of writing this very sentence, it has taken me 30 fucking hours of so-called gameplay to get through barely a fraction of this waking nightmare. Curtains please for Dark Souls 3, but every enemy is Curse-Rotted Greatwood. Part 1. For the uninitiated, my unwritten rule for these games is that I always pick deprived and no gift, and I'm only allowed to upgrade strength. When I reach 99, I dump it into something useless like faith. I spend an abnormal amount of time in the character creator because I just know that this is the last time I will feel anything other than guilt. I don't even really know where to start. There's just so much to get into, so I'll just begin with the physicality of this monstrous being. Treeballs is gigantic, and his hitbox is even bigger. The modder for this randomizer ran into several seemingly catastrophic issues with this dude, so everything designated as an enemy takes damage on the entire surface area of its body, instead of having to ball bust every time. Oh yeah, the audio is delectable. Before randomizing, I turned on the scaling, which explains the mismatch between damage and HP. The untended graves were a terrifying but easy scramble and will be the last time anything ever works out for me that quickly. As for the scaling, little did I know at the time that this little configuration would manifest itself physically as an unruptured aortic aneurysm. Behold, my prison cell, in all its glory, where I would go on to spend 5.5 fucking hours. Yes, we're starting off strong. We're starting off with the equivalent of throwing a newborn into a fast-moving river to learn how to swim. Except newborns already know how to swim and I just got here. If I went through my entire process, we would be here all day. So here's a condensed version. There was an active tree balls on the left, but everything else was in the idle pose. They wake up when I hit them, so that's pretty much the only way to get them out of the way, and even hope to progress. Yes, indeed. My main damage dealer for the rest of my life is the Lord of Scrotum himself. Down by the cliff are some firebombs, quite possibly the most important tool that my character could possess. But I don't make much use of them just yet. I'm eventually forced into the corner and get straddled, so I introduce myself to F equals MA and set the benchmark of my thoughts in this godless endeavor. I somehow make it under, through, and by the green eggs and branch to the fog door before gargling a multitude of necrotic pustules, establishing the fact that I'll have to kill enemies to even make it in. When this first guy in the gully spins anti-clockwise, I consider it a good pattern, since it causes him to disappear for reasons I will get into soon enough. The same thing happens at the fog door and I'm allowed into the fight, with Udex Greatwood presenting himself full frontal and his harem of cucks flanking him by each septic colony. Suffice to say, it wasn't looking good. I take unnecessary damage and land 11 hits on his taint with no results. Absolutely pathetic. The far left side yields about as many results as usual, so I roll for a good pattern on the far right side with disastrous implications. This is why I called it a good pattern. The clockwise spin completely fucks my strategy to death and after. Probing safer options leads to the harebrained scheme to aggro the left side into killing each other while I wait by the cliff, establishing another horrific trend that is present at every choke point, multiple times. for the rest of the game. With those guys dead, I dash the door and, obviously, die, which means I need to somehow rid myself of the bouncers too. With this in mind, I trot along the cliffside to find any pokey-outy bits to aggro as far back as possible, to damage as many blockades as possible. Amazingly, it barely fucking works with a well-placed heavy attack. Sure, this is pretty cool, but I'm gonna die a horrible death now. In any case, my scientific process has yielded a way to eliminate the left path and the fog door. Now I just need to find a way to return to my safe spot. Until I figure that out, I attempt brain-rotted Gundyr on the good runs, learning a boss that I had always rejected and thus never truly learned. The grinder satellites are a real menace, especially this disgusting freak with the red eyes. By now it had been an hour with no progress, so I materialized the first stage of grief by denying this boss its right to be a boss, like I had before, and try to find ways to make it fall off or get hit by its friend. I reap my karma in kind, 39 deaths in. I discover a way to kill the first AFK guy, reaching deeper into the left path and aggroing the residents of this little connector, in turn allowing me to retreat to the safe spot and wait out the storm. If I don't respect the boss, it won't respect me. I have to learn it if I want to escape this bad trip. I spend about 15 minutes pushing and prodding the beast to learn what I could. For example, it has a throwing attack that seems to be completely random and ignores iframes. In fact, this attack leads to more deaths than anything else in the run, because it's complete bullshit. I also find out that, gradually, the minions begin to stop spawning after a certain amount of deaths, which I estimate to be about 20 in a shared pool, all of those deaths being to their dungeon daddy. To top it off, I find out that when a certain number of them die in a fast enough time frame, I'm rewarded with an Estus flask charge. Sometimes I get like 5, sometimes I get none. Now, I'm finally ready to tackle the boss. Ass crash, run away and behind him. Left stomp, track left and dodge. Right stomp, track right and dodge. Anticipate ground pats and leaf rakers. Headbanger, away and behind. Roll into the haymakers to avoid the leg follow-up. Projectile attack, fucking pray. And as for the prayer smash, roll through the knee and punish. This was hard. This was unbelievably hard. The last time I had spent this long in anything in these games was pre-nerf Star Scourge, when Elden Ring first released. I hadn't even made it to phase 2 after 2 hours. At the 4-hour mark, I had snapped, and between bouts of painful laughter, cried at the realization that Miyazaki himself was edging to the fact that this was happening to me. It was at this point that I reconsidered this challenge. I had to spend at minimum 10 minutes just trying to make it to the fog door, to spend another 10 minutes despawning the minions to even have a shot at this piece of shit, with this piece of shit weapon and stats. I couldn't help it but to reject the boss again. I couldn't fight it fairly, not with my sanity on the line. With a heavy heart, I report that I opened the randomizer back up to revert all the enemies to normal. And I mean, it wouldn't be that bad if I did the rest of the run properly, right? Wrong. Five and a half fucking hours, just in case you forgot. Ironically, what killed him in the end was the bouncer from earlier, who seemingly stuck a toothpick under his nail until he died. The fact that the tutorial almost took as long as the previous runs I've done is testament to what unholy thing I've gotten myself into. Finally though, I can upgrade my strength and my Estus charges. It isn't easy, but I scamper up the staircase and do my best to ignore the orgy occurring upstairs. I say hi to my waifu, the handmaiden, get the tree skip first try, grab the Estus shard and the silver serpent ring. For desecrating their cousin like that, the game reminds me that I never got my ashen Estus flask at the beginning. So there's that. When all is said and done, I'm left with 5 Estus charges. Swag. The high wall is where dreams and aspirations go to slowly decompose over time. eventually becoming a memory so faint and neglected that you forget what it was ever like to be normal. Smash button, comment to like, bell, subscribe, and guess down below the amount of time I spent here going once, going twice, and wrong. I'm under your bed. This bonfire isn't safe, but thankfully not locked. It doesn't matter though, because the battlements to the tower wall, i.e. the only way forward, are filled to the brim with enemies, enough to encroach upon my anus and burst out of my mouth. After getting teabagged a few times, I admit defeat. I'm going to have to defeat this roadblock with another long, convoluted stratagem. The feeling I had here was analogous to the feeling you get when you've been trying not to reach escape velocity while shitting, and feeling relief wash over you, only for all the relief to empty out of you along with the rest of your bowels. To make matters worse than they already were, I can't go back to Firelink, because whenever I rested the bonfire I get kicked off of it immediately. This could have been fixed by simply homeward boning back to Firelink, but I didn't know that at the time. The right battlement is useless and full, like my cats, so the left one is where all the action will be. With some fiddling, I bait most of the weeping willies toward my vantage point, behind some turrets, where I slowly whittle them down. I am mostly, if not completely safe, if it weren't for that fucking projectile attack. Now is as good a time as any to explain how I think it works. As soon as the animation starts, a radius spawns in where the attack is able to hit you. The aim is to escape this radius before the animation ends, or you will get hit. Maybe. Sometimes. And even if you escape, you might get splashed. Or if there is so much as a twig covering the teleportation spot, then it will do no damage at all. I say teleportation spot because it isn't actually a projectile, I think. It doesn't need direct LOS to be used on you or have any room to do so. Where it works and doesn't work is essentially random. Anyway, let's just pretend that I made it past that accursed first battlement and into the first tower. There is an armada waiting to bend me over as soon as I turn the corner. Thankfully, there's a coveted safe spot right by the ladder. And by safe I mean 99% of the time it protects me, and 1% of the time I'm kissed between the cheeks by some predator through the wall. This is all well and good until some dipshit forgoes the usual landing strip and ends up right inside my exit doorway, where they either kill me or get killed. And guess which one happens more often? Let's just pretend I made it out of the door for brevity's sake and to put my point across. I'm usually out of Estus and luck by now, and I'm basically cooked if ever I make it here. Let's pretend I don't die to this bullshit projectile attack and somehow make it past that guy. The fucking wyverns are still an environmental hazard, meaning I would be risking about 15 minutes worth of an attempt to make it inside the tower and likely into my doom. However, that flame breath gives me a fantastic idea. Precisely 0 things have changed about the environment, but I sure did feel like a genius after realizing I can bait the fire breath into killing the great chuds over there. Someone airdrops me the deep battle axe, which is actually hot steaming trash, but I don't know that yet. Roughly 5 minutes later, I am able to make it across to where the tower bonfire is located. Trouble is, I am in range for the projectile attack, and cannot run away far enough lest I get burned to a salty little crisp by the dragon up top. In my desperation, I look for any sort of nook to nestle myself into so that the guys in the tower kill each other, but I am left pulling my eyelids off after having been spread evenly and without flaw between the cobblestones. 30 minutes for a successful attempt is what we are talking about here. By the time I filmed that clip, I was 8 hours and 112 deaths into the run, and each attempt would grind another year or so off of my lifespan. So, let's get another montage going. Nah, just kidding. We'll need some determined sounding music, but not too epic. First battlement. Bait the furthest right Greatwood into killing all of his friends, followed by baiting the furthest on the left into doing the same. First tower. Roll into the ladder for about 5 minutes until you start drooling and your cranium sinks in the middle. Dragon stairs. Bait the fire breath into killing as many as possible until things stop taking damage. After about 50 enemies have died, start rolling into this here tree until... You know what? Fuck this. I'm just going in, and whatever happens after that, I'm not responsible for. Holy fucking shit! 4 hours and 15 minutes. I fucking love video games! This bonfire is the worst one so far. If I'm unlucky, I die in less than 1 second. How it's not locked is up for debate. I swap back to the club at this point because the deep battle axe is shockingly awful. While I'm here, I do some exploring, so I go check on Grey Rat, who I will absolutely, for sure, 100% release from his eternal prison. I promise. I grab some throwing knives, which are pretty dang awful too, all things considered. You can hardly aim them and they don't have an arc on the throw, meaning you can only hit whatever's directly in front of you. After some faffing about, I look outside to familiarize myself with the next roadblock, while having 9 beach ball-sized testicles stuffed into my mouth. Every time I respawn, I have to make a mad dash just to survive the onslaught of in-laws. But if I'm lucky and I get a good roll on the rooftop bastards, I'm given access to what looks like a geriatric rave. They quickly become senile and irate when I clobber them across the back of the head. Go figure. So I retreat to make it look like I'm not at fault. You'd think that this is another case of simply waiting, but that would mean you don't think, because you forgot about the projectile attack that seems to phase through time and space, slowly but surely degrading my health over time. Just when it looks like the rooftop is empty, a billion more arrive fashionably late to the bingo disco, but just in time to spit roast me. What comes after that is a perilous rooftop escape, where I can either roll off to the left and risk plummeting to my doom, or go down a ladder to the right and risk becoming two-dimensional. And what comes after that is the parade, where I can either go left toward the dancer, right toward Vordt, or a little more right to the elevator shortcut. It's at this stage also that I start making intelligent use of firebombs. They aggro enemies from extremely far away, due in part to the arc of the throwing animation that reaches over buildings and other tree ballses. It also does decent amount of damage. I honestly couldn't have done this run without them, so sincerely, thank you, Lemon. Let's start from the beginning of the gauntlet. Survive the Gazan neighborhood strike and make for the basement with haste. Tickle a scrotum over here and wait, and wait, and wait, and wait, and wait, and then wait, and wait, and wait, and wait, and wait. What the fuck? Where the fuck am I? What the fuck was that? Let me just check. Okay. So the next logical step after all of that is to simply get the shortcut elevator after only 4 hours. Yes, 4 hours. Makes sense? Alright, sweet. Let's move on to the parade section, which has 2 bosses. I'd rather attempt the dancer boss fight first for the sole reason that there appears to be an easier path, for now. And while it is a struggle to get to the boss, I was not looking forward to this fight, because it would probably be an even harder struggle. I had to show some sort of fruits from my nonsensical labor. So after leveling my strength just a tad more, I decided that the most preferred option was to approach from the dancer bonfire, because I absolutely could not sanction the presence of either of the other 2 bonfires. It's absolutely clogged though, and the Lothric County Council have hired a vaguely plunger-shaped ashen undead to resolve the issue. The bullshit projectile attack is bullshit, so baiting them at the door will send me over the fucking edge. I mean it, man. At the rate I was going at, I was doing 5 hours of progress between every single checkpoint. In fact, after the dancer boss fight, I was holding back laughter, not because anything was funny or that I was making progress, but because I'd brought this upon myself. Having changed absolutely nothing about my line of attack and brute forcing my way into Vordt's arena, I get to work, finally being able to flex my supple but firm muscles and finely honed brain rot, because everything in my head was now replaced by Greatwood's cursed and rotten Greatwood. His pustules split under the might of his very essence, a not so cursed or rotten or great piece of wood. I slurp up his acid diarrhea like it's Granny's pepper sauce and humiliate this poor wretch. If he can do that, I can do this. Paranoia dictates my actions to the degree that I impulsively fill up on homered bones in case I softlock myself. Thankfully, the game provides a rampart that is immune to any attacks from a friendly group that is peacefully protesting my presence in this piece of poo piss take of a predicament. Except for the projectile attack, of course. You can assume that wherever I am, I'm constantly searching for a safe spot that avoids that attack in the same way that a cockroach seeks the nearest athlete's foot. In a terribly misinformed attempt to rescue Yol, he reaps the karma that I sowed, and pays the price for my negligence. Oh well, he would have died to the Boreal ballsack that somehow spawns inside Firelink Shrine. I could not find a consistent way to safe spot this shit. I basically smash my face into a brick wall in both interpretations of the idiom until they all die. Supposedly, alluring skulls work in the sky, but honestly I can't think of a single time it would have been more useful than firebombs. Half an hour later, I managed to clamber my way to the first settlement bonfire, where I soak in every square inch of the next 10 hours of my life. The literal only way to progress toward anything is through an onslaught of like 10 tiny doorways, where I rely on RNG so heavily that I've run out of gods to pledge my soul to. Waiting around allows me to slowly come to grips with the fact that I've officially ruined my life. I take one look at the near bridge to the cliffside bonfire and enact my panic and roll around strategy. Waiting around actually seems to bear less fruit than just forcing myself into the goatsy and spinning around until I make my way. I forgot to record myself making it to this next part, so here's a Microsoft Paint rendition of how I got over here. This tunnel reminds me of the medieval city I grew up in, complete with scrotum juice all over the ground, and living corpses leaning against the wall asking me for money. The safe spot is safe, but it's safe to say that the next fray is far and away a horrible stay, and I pray that my foray will somehow, some way, one day keep the Hatman at bay. I really don't know how I did it, but I happened across this bonfire by the sewer, which is definitely a welcome surprise. It only took a fucking hour of being crushed between wooden urethras. The first bridge illustrated how fucked up that route potentially was, and the route up and around the valley seemed like a much more attractive option, and it's an option that's been selected. Unfortunately for me, I basically respawn inside of this fucker's descending colon, and boy oh boy does he have some inflamed diverticuli. I yoink the bone shard with some effort and slowly, painfully come to the conclusion that this route is simply impossible. There isn't a single spot that simultaneously kills the goon squad and keeps me safe. They are mutually exclusive, and the giant archer is doing his best to become my 13th reason. So it's time for me to go back to the first bonfire and attempt to cross the first bridge. And the current minigame is to make it to that cliffside bonfire before I finish inhaling the can of bug spray. Fortunately, the foes in my path are in cahoots with my education system, and are just in time for my next explanation while I make it to the next bonfire. Buckle up, students. Every time an enemy attacks in Dark Souls, they have a script running that is constantly aware of my position on the horizontal axis, so they know where to be and where to attack, and have an animation table that matches this. In Bloodborne and thusly DS3, enemies are now not only aware of my vertical position, but have altered attack scripts that allow them to hit you on slopes, or between any alterations in height. They also have animations for this that makes use of high collision and low collision, so that it looks natural, and makes for better gameplay. Illusory Wall has made a video on this that I linked in my description. The thing is, Treeballs has this present in his code too, since all enemies do in this game. However, his arena is mostly flat, where all he really has to do is adjust for maybe a foot of height difference. He also has to fall into a lower flat pit in phase 2. Now, when you remove him from his arena and place him in all sorts of fucked up places, you create all sorts of fucked up scenarios where he clips through the map across the entire y-axis. Horizontally, he works fine, but as far as I'm concerned, it's safer to assume that the entire y-axis is under his jurisdiction. This is both good and bad. Good in the sense that he fucks up and goes too high or too low and lets me past. And bad in the sense that he can very easily ascend from beneath the Earth's crust to ruin my life. Explanation over. So the next problem is this rickety-ass bridge that leads to the chapel where Sigurd is. A mad dash through the orgy leaves me only partially violated, and I set up shop in the adjacent sewer, where all the bodily fluids and acidic chlorophyllic rectum sauce builds up like sediment. It's actually easier than it looks to make it past the bridge, but I am again not left unscathed. Sigurd really has no patience for my troubles, so I leave him where he is, befuddled, and descend to take a single look at the next bonfire and decide, nah. Instead, I befriend the giant archer and am forced to make myself comfortable in the cuck chair, since this testicle titan that replaces the crumbling demon aggroes onto me and tricks Sigurd into thinking that I'm fighting it. This is one of several ways to acquire a fire gem, a potentially useful direction I could bring my weaponry, so I tried to divert aggro away from Sigurd to spare his poor soul. This is useless, because so is Sigurd, who does all but 15 damage per hit, and allows the demonic foliage to stampede its way toward me and capitalize on my stupidity, right as it was about to die. I didn't write this into the script, but I'm leaving the actual Curse-Rotted Greatwood until a more thematically appropriate time. Fuck you. Repeat the sewer strat and this time ignore everything else and simply waltz around the Outrider Greatwood to capture this here bonfire. I then capture a coveted ember before making haste toward a potentially useful weapon, the butcher knife. Treeballs is weak to slash damage and it scales very awesome saucily. It isn't an easy trek, but I find Mildred's outpost, drop down to it, and crash my game. Actually, my entire PC shits itself, and I spend the next 10 minutes trying to reboot the game. What happens next is so awful that I couldn't even record the game without it crashing over and over. Instead, I had to record this next bit on my phone. So what's happening here is that for some reason my game is completely fucked, and I don't know why or how. It runs at a whopping 1 frame per second, at best, and my PC lifts its control rods to heat my room. I keep restarting the game to no avail, and resort to killing myself very, very slowly. Upon respawning, I find out that this didn't work either. You might think, why doesn't he just restart his PC? Yeah, I don't know, I hadn't done that yet, and it worked. Shocker. Upon returning to Mildred's location, I get unfairly booted off the edge and catch a glimpse of my potential next weapon. Yeah, I don't know. I have no explanation. Right, that led nowhere, so on to the next CBT session. The watery swamp is, and it's not even close, the most fucked up area in the whole run. There are at minimum 100 enemies packed into this demented freak-off that all aggro onto me at the same frame that I spawn in at. What was trying to sound its way into my bladder was the nucleus of my derangement from here on out. Oh yeah, and remember how I applied scaling to the randomizer? Well, I get 1200 souls per kill instead of 1000 now. That also means that they do more damage. The implication of this is that since I'm only leveling strength for some reason, I will very soon be one shot to every single attack sent my way. And it's already this bad at the first increment. Let's begin. The rightmost side was more or less fruitless, since there was no determinable safe spot, and I couldn't outrun them due to the slowing effects of the mire, compounded with the sheer quantity of what seems to exclusively comprise of members of the registry. The only thing going for me was the death of a single mud crab that gives me some useless ring. The leftmost side has the same number of enemies, squared. There's nothing even resembling a safe spot, especially when the entire forest descends upon my poor undead. The middle route has the same number of enemies again, but cubed. This sucks and is stupid, and I'm gonna have to solve another roadblock puzzle. I mean, I asked for it, but I didn't expect them to be this whack. To start, I have to stand behind this rock, which is the only spot on this trail that has a somewhat high chance of preventing the projectile attack from hitting me. The deciduous duo directly on the downward path are slowly killed by their friends, and I wait for everyone else to slowly grind their trussies over to my hovel to slowly kill each other. And if I'm lucky, they didn't use too many projectile attacks by now. Once there's only one left, I run all the way down to the pond to bait even more friends, or fronds in this case, and run as fast as possible to this specific spot by some roots. To put it simply, I'm immune to almost all attacks, except for the obvious, so I spam rolls to fool myself into thinking I have even a modicum of agency on this disaster of a process. Every time there's only one remaining, I wait for them to attack, and sprint toward the eldritch mass in my way, running back to bait even more to the safe spot. Once I reach 46,000 souls, I know I've reached the minimum safe amount to run for my life toward the ladder to the next bonfire. It only took 2 hours, but finally I conquered this puzzle, and I am at my fucking limit. It'd be nothing less than roadblock after roadblock, a seemingly endless stream of conceptual diarrhea, and I was sick to my stomach at the thought of repeating that process again, which, by the way, takes 15 minutes to complete. I stared at the unrandomization button like the Green Goblin mask this whole run, and honestly, is it even worth it at this point? Sure, the last time something this monumental was accomplished was when humans learned how to cook, and I'm trying to cook, I really am, but I asked myself if it was time to give up entirely. Yes, it is worth it. This shit feels like meth administered directly into my frontal lobe. This bonfire is completely unsafe. The only way to survive spawning in is to immediately leave the room and moisten the fungus between my toes in the swamp. I could run into this brick wall in both senses yet again, but that only traps me in the room to die. My main focus is on the Estus Shard, Bone Shard, and Greatsword within the swamp. Oh yeah, there's an Estus Shard in the settlement. Anyway, I quench the rightmost chimney, die, and try the leftmost chimney right after. Unlike the right side, this section is so bricked up with enemies that my PC gets slightly louder when I approach it. Waiting for enemies to kill each other is a waste of my time. I mean, more of a waste of time than spending in-game days on this shit. So I brute force repeatedly until I manage to get the second chimney. The third chimney is unguarded for about 10 seconds, which is enough to quench it, but definitely not enough to survive the oncoming buttfuckery. Also, I got the Greatsword, but I think I forgot to hit record at that part. Here's a recreation of how I did that. Small aside, I'd gone up the ladder and embered to bait the invader to spawn, so I could get the Great Club, but I had no idea that they had already died during one of my more tragic attempts where I wasted an ember. The Great Club is right there in my inventory, but you must understand, I was suffering from some pretty aggressive brain shrinkage on par with what the Udam had, so I was lamenting the loss of my favorite weapon for no fucking reason. I donned Faris's hat, that I picked up along the way, and also forgot to record and draw out a mental map of the route I need to take. I need to keep to the rightmost island, slowly glomping my way in by the foot of the bridge, and yeah, I forgot to record that part too. Listen, I was running out of hard drive space, okay? I couldn't just record hours and hours of unsuccessful attempts, just pretend that this part right here isn't staged, and that I could have forged diamonds in the crevice between my tensed glutes. And what awaits me next is nothing short of PTS fucking D. Curse-Rotted straight dud. Instead of showing you another doomer montage, let's cut straight to the success. To prepare for this next part, I grab the other Estus shard, then the bone shard, and begin lathering up in anticipation for the Fire and Wolf bonfire, so I can use the ashes to buy Titanite shards. First, aggro the slugs by the ladder, then the slugs in the watchtower, then run as fast as possible to the doors of Farron, to the largest safe spot on the run so far. Shame it doesn't work, where fucking 80 tree chodes do their best to get through the glory hole, but they are not appropriately endowed for that. And that's it. I just fuck around on this part until everything dies, while being completely filled with paranoia that I will get one shot by the projectile attack, or Ezra Miller facing through the wall to touch me. On this attempt I kill all 76 chunguses required to make it up the ladder, only to get Jenkum jousted to death. Send help. Eventually I make it up the ladder and grab the ashes. Now onto the next bonfire, which would serve well as a good checkpoint for the Abyss Greatwoods. You just walk around the corner, really. Yeah. This is where I realized that I did, in fact, have the Great Club, and so I upgraded it because I expected to use it at some point. Not because it's super cool, but because I thought that using a Greatwood to kill a Greatwood would be great, but what greatly would Greatwood, 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 Greatwood. Anyway, the run to the boss fight is only just as painful as passing a kidney stone, but I make it anyway, where I'm greeted by a single entity instead of 4, which I was dreading. I was expecting 2 phases, so this was going to be hard. But I was going to be harder, and I get down on all 4s and flex my alpha male superiority over these buffoons and their petty leader, who definitely does not kill me here or here, and I get him to phase 2 on my first try, and there is no phase 2. I mean, okay, I was actually looking forward to that. The Catacombs are the worst thing to happen to me since waking up this morning. Immediately, the bottom right of my screen shows me that I did in fact turn on scaling way back when, and that everything does in fact kill me in one shot. There are only 2 attacks in this area that don't one-shot me, and they're the easiest to avoid, so it doesn't even matter. Even the projectile attack kills me if both nobules hit me. Obviously, the normal path is just as packed with chill dudes, so I consider only the skip on the right. If you didn't know there was a skip here, you are stupid and weird. 10 minutes of nothing but brain-dead rushing leads nowhere, so I decide to let the Great Shoulds kill each other while I stand in, by far, the loveliest safe spot, since it baits everyone into scooching off the edge, and I get to hang out with the broskies upstairs. Unfortunately, there's some weird fucker who gets stuck in the doorway, and goes on to display my earlier thesis where he constantly clips onto the map in an attempt to kill me, but it also prevents me from moving past him or hitting him. Anyway, this next part is so unbelievably fucked that I'll just summarize it by saying, just run around. Pray to whoever, and grab this bonfire before the realization that you are wasting your prime years sets in. Welcome, everyone, to the latest Roadblock. That room with the skeletons sure is inactive, but man are they good at preventing me from playing the game. What I have to do here is use firebombs to bait the blokes furthest in the back and wait for them to piss up everyone's ass, while being paranoid inside this tunnel in this specific spot, since the only thing that kills me is you-know-what. There is such an insane amount of enemies that sometimes up to 100 die if I take my time. Usually I make a break for this section. Once I've spent 15 minutes rotting in my chair, I'm allowed to cross the bridge. I briefly check out the ladder, but check out once the screen starts shaking. I was instead going to attempt to kill Great Lord Woodnir. This fight thankfully doesn't have him vaping all over the place, but fuck me, I wish it did. Instead of this fuck-ass slope. Remember that high and low collision thing I talked about earlier? Yeah, he wigs out in regards to this slope. 9 times out of 10, the pustule I'm trying to bust is under the ground, where I can't hit it. And if even the tip of your weapon hits something else first, you won't get a successful hit off the pustule. Another amazing feature of this fight is that, 9 times out of 10, the minions are completely unlit when new ones spawn, and I get surprise fisted from behind. To top it all off, I have to gather the mental fortitude after 20-minute runbacks to use my brain properly. That won't stop me. Much like a stop sign can't stop me, and I power on through my first attempts. Blood surging all around my body as I get the dopamine hit of a lifetime when this happens. Yeah, okay. Time for something else. For now, I go gawk at the journey I would have to take to make it to Crystal Sage. On my first go around, I knew instinctively that it would be beyond my pay grade and ability to even fathom how I could do this part. Purely for reconnaissance, I spent about 10 minutes baiting every penis toward the ladder opening to perform a mass genocide the likes of which has not been seen since I finally decided to wash my poop sock and its microbial colonies. First of all, the shortcut on the right hand side looks to be the safest bet, but involves killing pretty much everything in order to even consider making it there. There's an unfathomable amount of squatters shacking up with Orbeck, and honestly, seems to be the only future option. In the spirit of recon, I ember up to gather information on the rest of the route. On the raised part, where the lycanthrope guys are, is empty, but only because of the constant baiting. The only way to get up there is filled with enemies, as was seen ages ago. There is a bonfire up there, but the trouble is it's home to like 1,000 hollows who chill right underneath it. If I ever decided to empty the forest and rest there, I would doubtless be soft-locked forever. Right, while I'm embered, I might as well go explore the smoldering lake, since I'm not one-shot anymore. Some firebomb baiting precludes master waiting and a pleasant stroll to the dungeon, where I gain access to an unexpectedly close bonfire. This divine stroke of luck from the gods spared me a divine stroke of cuck in my brain, turning the boss run into but a minute-long journey. Oh my god, something's actually gone well. The smoldering lake is as friendly as ever, but if you would believe it, it is actually easier to traverse than usual. Fucking insane. Though like all things, this upward trajectory was bound to go awry. The old Demon King is on my hit list, and unfortunately for him I respawn underneath his mailbox. This fight was fixing to be annoying, what with the mounds of demons getting in the way all the time, and the bumpy arena. It's almost like he knows that I need to hit his pustules, so he hides them inside his pile of dirty laundry. What a cunt. Fortunately for me though, it seems his goons kept spawning inside the laundry piles too and couldn't get out, locking the spawn rates for the rest of the fight. Did you know he has a pustule on his right shoulder? I didn't, and neither did he, it seems. This fight was easy, and my luck is still rolling. Could it be? Am I feeling optimism? It's high time I finish things with Walnir, the bastard. The dungeon bonfire is immensely useful, but I need to break the bridge using a firebomb since bows are too weak, and it just barely works too. I still need to cut the difference between victory and skill issue, so let's just cue the montage. And that wraps it up for this part. I was expecting to do a multi-part series, but that was only because I thought it was going to be Dark Souls 2. But as you may or may not know, it doesn't work, because the game is just that badly made. It probably won't happen, ever. I mean, who gives a fuck about that game anyway? If you were wondering, my death count got to 405 by the time of recording this, and my time played reached 29 hours and 56 minutes. Help. Also, you should leave a comment, because I like reading them and they're usually funny. Anyway, thanks for watching, I do appreciate it. I still haven't filmed any more footage because I basically ran out of space and this video is long enough as it is. Toodaloo!